Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats, we would like our next session to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our next session, which has a title, Homegrown Solutions for the Middle East. If we're looking for solutions, what is the problem? We don't need more proof, and yet proof comes with every day. Today, with an attack on buses carrying Coptic Christians in Egypt, Monday, in an attack on a music concert in Manchester, and this week, attacks in the Philippines and in Indonesia. All of them in the name of the so-called Islamic State, Daesh, ISIS, ISIL, whatever you call them. It is a threat which is truly global. Today, we want to focus on the sharp end of this threat, and we've been reminded of the accelerating campaign to fight against Daesh in the NATO summit, which is just ending in Brussels, and also in President Trump's first visit to the Middle East. The battle against Daesh's territorial control in Iraq and Syria is, we are told, approaching its last phases. The most difficult, the most dangerous. Who will fight these battles? Who will we rebuild after Daesh is pushed out? And can we be certain that there will not be a son of Daesh or a daughter of Daesh? How can the region, held by its allies, prevent that? And who will pay for the reconstruction? These are the questions we would like to discuss today, and mostly to discuss what the region will do. We're very honored to have you, Your Excellency, the very busy Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mevlut Cavusoglu, who has been the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Turkey since November of 2015, his second time in the job. He was also the Minister for Europe and a chief negotiator for Europe. But now he has to spend a lot of time worrying about problems closer to home, in fact, right on the border. Beside him, we're equally happy to have the Honorable Nasseh Judeh, the longest-serving Foreign Minister in Jordan, Foreign Minister, Minister of Expatriates, who presided over a very challenging time for the kingdom, including the 2 years it was a member of the UN Security Council. Sir John Jenkins, a very distinguished career as a British ambassador. He served in Syria, he served in Iraq, he was a Consul General for Jerusalem, among many other things, many other challenges. And now he's the Executive Director for the International Institute of Strategic Studies in the Middle East. And we just met in Riyadh. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, this is a time where we have to rise above the disturbing details. And to do that, we need a philosopher king. So we brought in Tariq Usman, hashtag no pressure, who is both an essayist, a philosopher, a political economist, and his latest book, Islamists, or Islamism, what it means for the Middle East and the world. And then there's all of you. And we have we're the young leaders. I suppose I should see all these young people in the front row. There's some of the young leaders. They've got some solutions for us too. Let us begin. First of all, to you, Your Excellency. I know this is at the top of your in tray. Do you believe that the last stage for the territorial battles against Daesh are underway now, and it's just a matter of weeks, months, that they will be defeated territorially, both in Iraq as well as in northern Syria?
Thank you very much, first of all, for the kind invitation. And I'm very happy to participate this time in the panel. And I like the title very much, by the way, Homegrown Solutions for the Middle East. Yes, when you look at the impacts of those problems, regional problems, it's global. Migration and refugee problem and terrorism became global problem and also needs global response. But local and regional ownership to overcome the problems is important. Fighting Daesh is important, but political solution is also equally important. So we need to pay attention both of them at the same time, simultaneously. And Operation Euphrates Shields prove how we can defeat Daesh.
This is the Turkish-led operation
Yes,
in northern
and
Syria.
Turkish troops, with the support of Turkish troops, with the local forces. And now, the local authorities are running all these cities cleared from Daesh. Elbab, Jarablus, Rai, Dabuk, and the other cities. And already 60,000 refugees from Turkey went back to those cities because they feel themselves safe because of the local ownership of these towns. So we can easily defeat this terrorist organization, but we need a predetermined strategy, result-oriented strategy, and we need to mobilize the right groups, right people, and we also have to plan the post-Daesh era in those areas.
Okay, well,
we can defeat Daesh in Raqqa easily. We can defeat Daesh in Mosul, both in Syria and Iraq generally. But we need to have that predetermined, result-oriented strategy, and we need to work with the right groups. There are 68 countries in the coalition against Daesh.
Okay, but I want to focus, because we're among friends here. We don't need to tell anyone. Everyone here knows what's happening on the ground, and we know your concerns. You say the right forces. The United States has decided that the right forces include the Syrian Democratic Forces, which include the YPG, the Syrian Kurdish forces. The United States has reassured Turkey, a NATO ally, that even though the Syrian Kurdish forces will take part in the battle for Raqqa, they will also protect your security. Has President Trump and everyone else convinced you of that?
No, we are not convinced. We still disagree. How can we convince? I mean, it's not only about Turkey, it's not only a security matter for Turkey, but it is also very important about the future of Syria. I mean, if we have decided to divide the country, it's okay. This is what we have been telling to our American friends. But when we put this question to Russians, the Iranians, and the others, they are all for the territorial integrity of the country.
Why would it have to divide the country if, for example, they now have set up a council which includes Sunni Arabs, which make up the majority of the pre-war population of Raqqa? There will also be some Kurdish forces, but a minority.
That is the cosmetic one. That is not the real one. And PKK and YPG is the same organization. Even Americans admit this. Americans believe that YPG is a terrorist organization. And they are trying to convince us that it is not a strategic choice, but they had to choose. But working with another terrorist organization to defeat Daesh is not the right strategy.
So what are you going to do?
And we put the typical question. Why YPG is fighting Daesh? Because they hate the ideology or because they hate Daesh? No, they just want to gain more territory. And at the end, they want to divide Syria. And they have been forcing the others, even the other Kurds, to leave all the cities that they have been forcing. It is a kind of ethnic cleansing. And this is very dangerous for the future of the country. And we are hosting 300,000 Kurds from Syria, and most of them were forced by YPG to leave because they don't share the ideology of YPG. They don't share the Marxist-communist ideology of YPG.
Okay, we're going to return to this, but I want to put something else in the pot. In southern Syria, along the Jordan border, Jordan has its concerns as well. As we know, some of the Islamic State fighters are heading towards your border. They're not very far away. And there's a concern that once Mosul and Raqqa fall, there'll be even more. We've heard from Turkey about its concerns. What about Jordan?
Well, thank you very much. Let me reiterate what my brother, Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu, said in expressing extreme happiness to be here with my colleagues and to be at the Bratislava Forum again. Now, I don't think you can look at things with such a fine-tooth comb. I mean, I think you have to really look at the larger picture. As far as I'm concerned, and being liberated from public office, I can express my opinions more freely, perhaps. We've always wanted Daesh to come closer to our borders so we can strike them harder. And so, you know, this notion of Daesh fighters coming close to our borders, yes, of course, we have to be vigilant. We have to, of course, take every precaution and every measure. But the closer they are to our border, the easier it is for us to hit them. And you know that Jordan has been in the forefront of this fight against terrorism. I just want to, perhaps if you'll allow me, to talk about, you were very, very focused when you said we are very, very close, or are we very, very close to territorially defeat Daesh. And my brother Mavlud said something that's extremely pertinent also, which is that, yes, there are some homegrown solutions, but some of these challenges and problems that we face have become global. Migration, terrorism, Syria, Iraq. I mean, when we're talking about these issues, they are global. And in some countries in the Middle East, you find that there's a mixture of national causes for radicalization and extremism, and transnational or international causes. I mean, look at any country in the Middle East, and you'll find that it's either this or that, or a mixture of both. The fight against Daesh may well militarily be decided in the next few weeks, in the sense that some of the territory that they had occupied will be liberated or regained. That's extremely important as a milestone, but does not mean that Daesh is over. Daesh will become less visible, but probably just as notorious, as we have seen recently. So we have to be very, very careful. We have to continue our cooperation.
That the actual battle to defeat Daesh, let's look at it territorial for the moment. That's the immediate focus. We know the ideology is also a concern. We've heard of some of the concerns about this battle to take it. That may determine what happens afterwards. Do you have particular concerns about the kind of forces which are gathered together to try to defeat them?
No concerns whatsoever. On the contrary, I think that the international collaboration and the more countries that are joining right now, and we saw the recent commitment made by NATO and others, it's very, very important to have more countries, more organizations joining this fight.
Even Syrian Kurdish forces? I know you disagree with your brother, but...
Yeah, no, he's my brother, but we don't necessarily have to agree on everything. But this, I mean, he answered it from a Turkish perspective, and of course one has to respect that. But, you know, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the ultimate goal of defeating Daesh, but also, if I may, you also mentioned something very important in your introduction, saying we don't want the son of Daesh or the daughter of Daesh. I don't care if it's a son or daughter. I don't want a successor to Daesh. We saw what fueled the creation and the existence and this gaining strength of Daesh, which is political marginalization in certain countries. Now, we have to find this careful balance where the military defeat, the territorial defeat of Daesh in Iraq and Syria will somehow morph itself into a political process that will ensure a better future, that will ensure that we don't have marginalization, again, that will create a successor to Daesh. And I have more to say about this in a little while.
Okay. Sir John, there's two battlefields, Syria and Iraq. They've got a different coalition of forces. Let's just look at the Syrian. We've heard some concerns about the alliance. There's at least three different fronts moving toward Raqqa. The Syrian Democratic Forces is one of them. The Syrian army is another, working with Russia and Iran. The Americans are in the mix. What are your particular concerns, if any?
It's very messy. It's not just messy in Syria. It's messy in Iraq. Now, Nasser was talking about, and Nasser is absolutely right. I mean, if you talk about how you stop Daesh recurring or rebooting, you need to address the wider, more fundamental structural discontents in the region. If you look at what's happening in Syria and Iraq in particular, actually, there is a very good, I think, military strategy to defeat Daesh in Mosul. And Daesh will be eventually pushed out of Mosul and defeated. It'll come at a considerable cost, particularly to the Iraqi security forces and others, but they will be pushed out. But every time they are pushed out of an area, as we've seen with other similar organizations in the past, when you smash them, they fragment and go elsewhere. You need a political and economic strategy on top of this, not to stop them recurring, because I don't think you can stop the ideology rebooting and reseeding elsewhere. We've seen this over the last 40 years with a succession of different organizations. And if Daesh themselves disappear, it'll be some other organization. all you can do is build resilience in the states of the region, and it has to be a state-based solution. I mean, when the minister was talking, quite correctly at the beginning, about this being a regional solutions to these challenges, that's true. But you can't have regional solutions, I don't think, without a significant international support. And this is where, of course, the United States come in, historically. Now, I think one of the problems we've seen in Syria and Iraq, and one of the reasons they got so messy, was because, actually, in many ways, the Americans withdrew from these two arenas. And I think this is, unless you have the hyperpower, the single hyperpower, convening not just states of the region, but outside, in terms of the military effort, but also the political effort, and more fundamentally, the economic reconstruction of these.
Let's look at that. The proverbial day after.
Yep.
There is the military strategy seems to be working so far
Yep.
in Mosul. It's messy when it comes to Raqqa, but what about the day after? People, even though people have talked about the day after in Mosul for years, when you read the reports now, people are worried. They don't really know what it's going to look like, the new political structures, and they don't know. They know there's not enough money. And the Americans have made it clear they are not there to be part of nation building, stabilization yet, but not nation building. Briefly from you, do you have concerns as we speak that the day after in both Mosul and Raqqa, they're not ready for it in terms of the thinking and the money?
I have huge concerns about it. And I think it's not the day after that counts, it's the 25 years after that are the most important thing. And this is, we're talking, I mean, we were together in Riyadh last weekend,
Yes,
whatever it was. And we were there for the launch of the relaunch of the Islamic Alliance Coalition against terrorism, which is good.
Yes.
But I still don't see a political plan. I actually think the political plan needs to focus on Iraq, quite honestly, because I think Syria is a much more difficult case. I think Iraq is the most important.
But equally.
But it's just, can I just say,
Yeah.
I was looking this morning at some photographs of parts of Aleppo, and of course not all Aleppo is destroyed, but significant parts of Aleppo have been destroyed. And if you look at Aleppo now, or Jarablus, or Manbij, or Tikrit, or Ramadi, or Fallujah, they look like Mogadishu.
That's right.
And this, just the physical reconstruction is going to be a massive challenge, let alone the moral, political, and border structural reconstruction.
I agree. I mean, at the risk of preempting my good friend Tariq before he speaks, I just want to say quickly, fighting Daesh, fighting ISIS, fighting, the whole package. The military, the security, and the ideological. And we have all of us agree that the ideological is going to be the longest battle. Now, but in order to do that, I mean, you've got the military, which I said is an extremely important factor. But in order to do that effectively, you've got to address political, social, and economic deprivation, not just in our part of the world, but even beyond. Deprivation leads to desperation. Desperation always leads to extremism. We know that all too well. So being politically deprived or marginalized will result in more extremism being born and raised somewhere else. So we just have to look at the whole package. Economic, I mean, social and economic deprivation is equally important to look at. And I think when you're talking about a Marshall Plan, I mean, somebody mentioned the Marshall Plan. You've got to sort out the politics and the security and the military, and then go into this, this phase of the Marshall Plan. You can't do it before.
The alienation and estrangement of a whole generation will take a long time, 25 years. In the first place, you have to get the water running, you have to get the electricity started, you have to repair people's homes. There's an estimate that's going to cost
We have to repair their minds and hearts.
Yeah, $100 billion. Okay, let's just for a moment remind ourselves of what it looks like on the ground. We have a little film we're going to show you just in visual imagery about what it looks like in this battle. love this. It's like coming to cinemas near you, you know, starring Hollywood stars. So, you see the huge destruction. So it is more than likely that the physical caliphate will be destroyed. But Tarek Usman, you've written about this, the virtual caliphate will still be there. People have touched on it already. That Daesh, in some form, will continue to live and could actually set its sights further from the region in Europe. How do you see the future after the military battles?
Daesh or ISIS itself, to be honest, for me, is not particularly that interesting. I think it will be defeated and crushed, as we have seen Islamic Jihad before, as we have seen the most elements of Al-Qaeda in certain parts, as we have seen Takfir wal-Hijra. There are so many groups that appeared in that part of the world, I mean the Eastern Mediterranean, Levant, and North Africa in the past 30, 40 years. And it has been mentioned already 3 times that the ideology has found a way to remain. I personally believe that the threat that the ideology will face quite soon will not come from the state, will come from theological innovation already happening in the Islamic world, but that's a different story. But I think the interesting part for me, at least right now, is that when ISIS Daesh is destroyed, certainly we will see new groups appearing. I actually think they will...
Certainly.
Certainly, in my mind. And I think...
Worse?
The form itself, again, we can debate how different ISIS was from, remember Al-Qaeda in Bilad al-Rafidin in Iraq before, or from Al-Qaeda.
Turkish foreign minister is getting really worried. He's not going to sleep tonight after this.
But I think, for me, the point that I would qualify in what you said, Liz, is Europe is a different issue, but I think militant Islamist groups will remain in the Eastern Mediterranean. So ISIS will be defeated. Somebody mentioned scattered. Yes, I think other groups with other names will emerge in the same land, in my opinion. And to my mind, you have to keep in mind a number of things that, I'm not saying that they doom the region, but to a large extent are serious threats to my mind, at least. And I hope I'm wrong. One is that, sorry.
I was going to say, if you then, if you had, here you have a current foreign minister and a former foreign minister, if they had called you in for some advice about how to deal with these certain threats, what kind of leadership can be shown to contain, if not to avoid, what's next, what's to come?
Well, I'll tell you what makes me a bit concerned, and whether the nation states, the big, powerful nation states of the region can do something about them, that's a different issue. But one is that we have had 2 pillars of nation state in the Eastern Mediterranean in the last 100 years, and these since the end of the Ottoman Empire. And these 2 pillars are called Syria and Iraq, by demography at least, and certainly by geography. Now, this central state in both of them is gone, and sadly, I think, to my mind, is gone for some time. Number 2, I think the nation...
In Iraq as well.
Effectively, I mean, I would put lots of question marks on effective central state in Iraq. I hope I'm wrong. But
they're trying to keep the state together in Syria.
But the second point is, remember, and people in the room know this even better than I do, that the nation state that appeared in the last 100 years was to a large extent based on the idea of Arabness in different forms in Syria, in Iraq. That idea is, in theory at least, the exact opposite of the idea of sectarianism, of sectarian identity. And whether we like it or not, I do not like it, but whether we like it or not, the notion of sectarianism in the Eastern Mediterranean has been gaining immense ground over the past...
And will do even more after this Riyadh summit, where it is being cast...
Will do even more,
in sectarian terms, not explicitly stated, but...
And one final point to keep in mind is that I think it's politically correct to say that nation states across the region are opposed, all of them in one way or another, to militant groups. But let's be also frank in the sense of you have major geopolitical struggle in the wider Middle East that has been raging for a number of time now. You do have a vacuum created simply by the collapse of some states. And of course, if you have militant groups that are on the ground, they are tools to be used by some countries, and many of them are more than happy to be used, because most of them are not necessarily there because they are ideologically inspired, but also many of them are there because they are mercenaries.
Both of them are CAs.
If anyone in this room is expecting a call from President Trump, please keep your telephone on. Please keep it on because we would like to hear what his Middle East policy is. If, however, you are not expecting a call from President Trump, please turn your telephone off. There is no better place to be than here with our distinguished guests. Your Excellency, we've just heard from our philosopher that the two pillars, Syria and Iraq, are falling apart.
I just say I never called myself philosopher.
Well, it's
You're
okay.
going,
For
thank
the
you for
purposes of this. I'm a journalist. I've given you a title. A respected analyst of new trends.
No, I love it. I actually really love it.
I took the king off. But with states which are not holding together, this is not a luxury for you. It's right on your border. What would be your homegrown solution? Let's take Syria, which is, I think, of great concern to you right now. People talk about that it will be some kind of loose partition. You know, this new idea of safe zones or de-escalation zones seem to be heading in that direction. Give us a little sense of what your homegrown solution would be, although, and we know there'll be some elements that you won't agree with the Americans and others involved in this.
Well, first of all, let me start from here. You can defeat the terrorist organization in this city or in that city or in this country, that country, militarily. But unless we have a genuine political solution, we cannot defeat neither the terrorist organizations or terrorists nor the ideology of the terrorists. And therefore, we have to focus the political solution in Syria and also in Iraq. In Iraq, the problem is discrimination, ethnic and sectarian discrimination of the administration. And in Syria, it is something else. It's a civil war in Syria. So we have to find a political solution. Yeah, we made a lot of achievements against Daesh to defeat Daesh and militarily on the ground. Yeah, we made also a lot of achievements, or we have been successful to stop the foreign terrorist fighters flow. We have better cooperation with the source countries as a transit country, better information and intelligence sharing. But at the end, if the fertile ground is there, as long as the fertile ground is there, which is the situation in Syria and Iraq, we cannot defeat the terrorist organization fully. Therefore, we have to pay attention to the political solution. That is what we have been doing with Russia. We also included...
You mean in Damascus, in terms of a wider political transition, which transition...
Well, the parameters of the political solution is very clear. It is in the UN Security Council 2254. My brother Nasser also contributed a lot to this. And therefore, the parameters over there, transition, and also new constitution and election and
do you think that's going to happen anytime soon?
No, it can happen. It can happen. It can happen. But with the right strategies. That's why I have been emphasizing the right strategy, predetermined, result-oriented strategy. We have to have a long-term vision for Syria, not short-sighted plans.
And Turkey, in fact, is working with Russia.
That's why ensuring this ceasefire or cessation of the hostilities is important. And at the last Astana meeting, Jordan is also observer there. Why did we have to sign an agreement for de-escalation zones? Since the agreements or the understanding that the regime and the opposition signed, there have been serious violations. And when there is a serious violations, it is not easy to actually maintain neither Astana process nor Geneva process. That's why we have to make sure that there is no violations. And now we are working how to implement this agreement on de-escalation zones, and how can we mobilize the observers over there. And we are working with all these guarantor countries. But just ensuring the ceasefire is not enough alone. We need to convince both sides to start the meaningful, genuine negotiations in Geneva. And Geneva is the main platform for the political solutions.
John Jenkins, you agree that there's a road to transition which will gather pace, or are we going to be with a messy kind of I don't want to use partition, but
in Syria,
different groups controlling different areas of Syria for some time to come.
I think that is what's going to happen, and I think that's fundamentally unstable. But I think it's going to be unstable for a very long time. I think all you can try and do in Syria, quite frankly, is to dial down the violence. You need to have some sort of process, some sort of way of reducing the level of conflict, because the level of conflict is massively costly in humanitarian terms, human terms, financial terms, and so forth. I still think that Iraq I think there is a central state in Iraq, simply because Iraq has oil. And I think that's which is a big distinction with Syria. And at the heart of most central states in the Middle East is money, is a budgetary process or a fiscal process.
Don't forget, there's a possible Kurd referendum this year.
There is indeed.
No, we have a smiling face in the front row.
I think even if you have, people talk about a federal solution for Syria. I mean, my problem with a federal solution is that you're going to get a bunch of statelets, all of which will fight each other because they'll be irredeemably irredentist. In Iraq, even if Iraq has some sort of federal solution, federal outcome, or whatever it is with the Kurds in the north, like with the KRG, you still need a central state to distribute, to act as the arbiter of the distribution of the spoils of the divided state. This is my issue with Iraq. I remember when I was ambassador to Iraq, talking to my old friend Osama Najefi about this, and he would say, well, we need a Sunni region, just like the Kurds have a region, and
they are talking about that now.
They talk about it. They've never stopped talking about it, actually. But I said to him, what exactly are you going to live on? I mean, the Kurds have oil and gas. The South has oil and gas. You have sand. You may have oil and gas under that sand, but nobody's explored for it. So what exactly is the process by which you sustain yourself?
But a place to call home, at least.
Yes.
But this is also the issue, of course, in Libya, because people talk about Libya. Well, I can understand, if you have Tripoli and El Barqa, Cyrenaica, what happens to Fazan in the middle? There is nothing there. So it's simply splitting a state. It's simply is a recipe for disaster, if you ask me. We've gone all this way, actually, I should say, without mentioning Iran as well. And I know we talk about the PKK. If you look at the PKK, I agree. I think the PKK and the YPG are essentially the same thing. But they are also supported by Iran. So when we think about the messiness of this, if you look at what the PKK are doing in Kirkuk, for example, or in Sinjar, the Iranians are an actor in this as well, which makes it even more volatile.
Okay. We've heard some of your points, some of your concerns. I just want to get a sense of what everyone in the audience is thinking about while they listen to this. All of you have come to this session with your own particular interests and concerns. Just by a show of hands, Mosul will fall, Daesh will be defeated militarily in Mosul. How many of you think the day after in Mosul, the international community will manage to work with the Iraqis to have a stable political solution for that region and also the money to rebuild? How many of you are pretty optimistic about it? Semi. Okay. How many of you are, as we speak, deeply, deeply concerned about the day after in Mosul? Okay, what about Syria? We all want to believe you, Your Excellency. We all want to believe there can be a smooth, peaceful transition in Syria for a kind of leadership that the majority of Syrians want. It's their decision. How many of you remain still deeply worried about the months to come in Syria? And how many of you believe the worst is not over?
It's a room for a realist.
May I?
Can I raise a point?
Okay, Nasser Jude, why don't you, Jordan, Jordan has played a role behind the scenes, in front of the scenes. You're right on the border. You're a bordering state. A lot at stake for you. What would you say to this kind of mood in the audience about the future of Syria and Iraq?
Yeah, well,
what can be done? What is the homegrown solution?
Yeah, Turkey and Jordan have a common denominator in the fact that we border both Syria and Iraq.
Yeah.
So I just want to go back to the Syria issue, and I think the foreign minister was absolutely correct in that we have to look at the long-term solution for Syria, the larger picture, but with immediate short-term steps that one has to take. For the longest time, we argued, and my brother will remember in the different meetings that we had before the ISSG, we argued over, Assad, for example. Is it a prerequisite that he leaves, or is it the inevitable outcome of a process? We argued about the involvement of Russia, and I was one of representing my country, was saying that Russia has to be involved because Russia holds a major key. And now I think, in hindsight, and hindsight is a luxury always, you think about some of the things that we should have done. Instead of thinking about the personalities and the leadership, as you said, we should have been thinking about the process that will produce the leadership. Not the personalities, but the process that will create the personalities. And I think, as the Foreign Minister of Turkey said, that if you have the elections, the constitutional reforms, and the different steps that are required to complete the democratic process, plus the fight against terrorism, which again is in the same context. Because if ISIS is defeated out of Iraq completely and pushed out of Syria completely, and you don't have a Syrian national context
can you
to
use
support
the word
that.
completely? Do you think completely is possible? Completely?
I'm talking about territorially.
Okay.
You're not. No. I go back to what I said earlier.
Okay.
You may get them out territorially,
Okay.
but ISIS as an ideology or the successor to ISIS will be there so long as we don't put together a collective effort to address, again, political, economic, and social deprivation. So, having said that, if you defeat ISIS territorially, whether in Iraq or in Syria, but mainly in Syria, since this is the topic in question now, and you don't have a Syrian national context to support that, meaning a political process that will ensure that everything is done to avoid marginalization or deprivation or desperation or economic woes or whatever it is that will create the right conditions for another Daesh, then you have a problem.
Yes, it's a huge challenge. I want to pick up on what John says.
Let me give you two examples or share two experiences from Iraq about the long-term and short-term plans. When America was leaving, they wanted to hand over Iraq to the hands of Maliki. We advised them not to do that because we knew how much Maliki is sectarian and against the other groups, including the Kurds and Turkmen, Sunni Arabs. American says that for the transition, they could stay, and he is not harmful. Now here where we are, just because of Maliki. And now why Mosul operation is successful? Because there is an agreement that neither Peshmerga nor Hashd Shabi is in the city. So this is actually long-term perspective. Nowadays, Hashd Shabi is violating the agreement. This is another story, which is very dangerous. But this is the actually long-term perspective, which is good. So short-term plans will not work, and the mistakes of those short-term plans will have long-term consequences.
But you're absolutely right, and I think we do need glimmers of hope. Iraq did learn some lessons, that with each big battle, Ramadi, Fallujah, now Mosul, they have learned some lessons, and they have been thinking about the sort of the coalition of forces. I want to bring you in, Tariq Usman, because you mentioned Iran. Let us bring it back to this current week. After the Riyadh summit, President Trump, King Salman of Saudi Arabia, the 55 members of the Arab Islamic Coalition, they have painted the region as Sunni Arabs largely against the main threat, which they see as Iran. But Iran is a key, if not the key actor in Iraq and a key actor in Syria. Can you, Tariq Usman, resolve the problems in Iraq and Syria unless the homegrown solution is everyone who's in the house, everyone who's at home, including Iran?
Can I go to Iran through a response to the majority that raised their hands about the very bleak future of Syria? I share your view, but for a very simple point. Irrespective of the political situation or solution that you will find for Syria, two things has already happened in Syria, and they're almost irrevocable. One, people keep talking about the, 2 million dead or something. But what people forget is that over 12 million Syrians have left Syria right now. The vast, vast majority of them are Sunni Muslims. Most of them are in countries that will not host them forever, and Europe doesn't want them. So at one point in time, they would need to come back. Coming back, meaning that the political transition that you would agree today will be on a demography that is vastly different from the demography that you'd expect to have 10 years from today. That's a disaster. But point number two, which is very important, I think, and I'll come to Iran to that, identity politics in the Arab world and in the Middle East is crucial. Syria is a relatively modern state, but it's a very old entity. And without getting into too much history, Syria, the historical Syria, has always been the heartland of Sunni Arabism in the Eastern Mediterranean. That has always been the case for at least 1,000 years, at least 1,000 years. The current political structure today and the demography in Syria today has diluted a lot that sense. That means that you are creating a notion, an entity that is at heart opposed to the history, the tradition, to even the feelings that has always dominated that part of the land. And that's irrational. It's completely ahistorical, if you'd like. And ahistory does not survive history.
Yeah, but
We've
Syrians
always
want to
seen that.
believe there's still a Syrianness about Syria.
Yeah, well, but fair enough, absolutely. But Syria was created, as we all know here, in the early 20s as effectively a land that was more or less put as a majority of Sunni Muslims in response to certain minorities. For them, a certain country was created called Modern Lebanon. Anyway,
So a century ago, with all due respect, Sir John, it was drawn up on the map. Now it's being redrawn in certain ways. Can it be put back together again? Bring us back to 2017.
I would love it to be put back again, but demography is crucial. Human beings are the heart of any state. So you can impose whatever political solution you want from the top. If it does not resonate with the identity of the majority in the ground, you have a problem because it will not last. And that takes us to Iran. I'll say one point in order not to speak forever. I think to a very large extent, there's Iranian expansionism, obviously, that has been there in the region for a number of times, for a number of years right now. But I think the problem that many people need to appreciate is that Iran comes with two dimensions that antagonize a lot of people. One is a sectarian dimension, and another is a national dimension.
Yes.
And both of them, I'll put it bluntly, rubbed the wrong way, if you'd like, many people in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that's why you have to talk to Iran from keeping in mind that it is, if you take it as an opponent, you are raising more fires in the region. It has to be brought from that identity matching to the region.
And we can't, I mean, as much as people want to criticize the way Iran acts, its use of militias in Iraq and Syria, the fact of the matter is the Syrian government wants it there and the Iraqi government wants it there. It's not as if it just landed without being asked, but we're being encouraged to come in.
That's a very important point. But just very, very quickly on this idea of demography. And you mentioned back to 2017. Well, 2016, we marked 100 years of Sykes-Picot. And many people would argue that Sykes-Picot in 1916 was about geography and geopolitics without taking demography into consideration. And that's why in 2016, 2015, 2014, you're seeing demography biting back. And taking revenge. And I think this is very, very important to just...
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right. The demography, the way it's been disrupted, the movement of millions of people. I mean, Turkey is worried about the demography. You're right to point out the shifting demography of Syria, what impact will have, because demography has now been weaponized in a way in Syria and Iraq, and it's very, very dangerous.
And sectarianism has been weaponized dramatically.
Exactly.
Only one sentence. I think it is in the long-term benefit of Iran itself to keep in mind that it has always had a wonderful positioning, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean, not only in Iraq, because of its cultural cooperation, the richness of its culture. The more the positioning of Iran is seen as sectarian and nationalist, as opposed to the Sunnism, if you'd like, and Arabness, the more it is not in the long-term benefit of Iran.
Well, we shouldn't forget that Iran is an important actor.
Exactly,
in the
yes,
area. And, but Iran is not playing a positive role or constructive role, rather very negative. And Iran's ambitions should be counterbalanced. On the other hand, isolating or ignoring Iran totally is not realistic and not helpful. And we should also give Iran responsibilities to enhance the political solution and to overcome the situation as well. That's why we gave responsibility to Iran in Astana. Iran became official guarantor. When we met in Moscow, together with Lavrov and Javad Zarif, I put a very simple question to Javad Zarif to include among us, I mean to the system, what do you guarantee? You have to guarantee something, otherwise you cannot be here.
That's right.
And he told us that he is the guarantee of the ceasefire. So far, not. But fully isolating and ignoring Iran is not realistic.
So
I know the problem, the sectarian problems, and the problem between Iran and the Gulf countries, and Iran is making a lot of mistakes. but on the other hand, we shouldn't forget the realities.
Yeah, but very, very quickly on,
yes.
on sector, I'm abusing the fact that I'm out of office, forgive me.
No, don't abuse it. We want you to
please.
use it.
I think I agree with Brother Mevlud. I mean, I think Iran has been playing a negative role, but I think the main feature of this negative role has been to sectarianize all these little hotspots and conflicts. And I think it is our collective responsibility to desectarianize and repoliticize this.
But it's being sectarianized again. Witness
Well,
the Riyadh summit. But if we could take it,
That's a response.
Yes, with your presence, because you have a real life experience to this question about whether a country like Iran, part of the homegrown solution, is part of the problem or part of the solution. Turkey made the strategic choice to work with Russia. It mustn't have been easy to shift course. We saw the end of the battle for Aleppo. We saw the Astana agreement. Now you're working with Iran as well. Can you tell all of us here that you believe Iran can be part of the solution?
It is not a strategic choice. We had to work with Russia to overcome the situation. When Aleppo was surrendered, and more than 45,000 innocent people were under the risk, and we had to evacuate these people. To evacuate them, we needed a ceasefire in Aleppo. And that's why we started working with Russia. And Russia actually delivered what they promised. And while we were evacuating those people, both Iran and the regime tried to actually damage this agreement. And they tried to actually block the evacuation. And Russia threatened them. And once we evacuated these people, and we decided to work together to extend the ceasefire other conflicting areas between the regime and the opposition. That's why we brought the armed groups and the Russian military and other intelligence people, and together with ours, together in Ankara, and at the end, they signed those understandings of first ceasefire and the political process, and that's how Astana process started. Meanwhile, of course, we saw the negative role of Iran continued, because they didn't want Russia and Turkey worked on this, and they encouraged regime to violate the ceasefire, even though regime signed the document and Russia was guarantor. And at the end, we also decided to include Iran. Now Iran is officially guarantor. Iran signed the documents, and we will see what Iran is going to deliver. We have to see that. But the question mark is still there.
Still there, but you have an experience of trying to get them on board. The time is short, ladies and gentlemen. We have one more issue we should discuss as part of this all too short panel, and that is to say that even with the big military and political questions that we've heard about and social questions, the EU announced earlier this year that it wanted to start looking sensitively, carefully about reconstruction, getting countries to start rebuilding in a country like Syria, even though the war was not yet over, but the needs are still great. How do you do that? Well, you need funds, you need a mechanism. We've had a suggestion from the Young Leaders Forum here from Bratislava about something called a Marshall Plan. Interesting enough, from what I've read of your document, you're sitting in that row, you don't want this so-called Marshall Plan to work in areas of conflict, including Syria. But I want to give the floor to one of you to sort of tell us, where do you see, if there is to be funds or start to go to some of the countries in the Middle East, which would they go to first and how would it happen? Which one of you would like to speak? Just to put another ingredient into our discussion. Are you the youngest in the Young Leaders Forum? Okay. Just leave us with a thought or two.
Well, essentially, it would be very difficult to concentrate on the conflict areas because obviously there is very complex geopolitics there. And it would be very difficult to try to rebuild while some other people are trying to blow up what we are trying to rebuild. So it might be advisable to start with the easier part. So we can think of Libya, where the conflict seems to be...
Libya is easy?
Well, much easier than Syria, for
Yes,
example.
yes.
I mean, think about the awful geopolitics of Syria or of Iraq. Libya is complex, but it's a bit easier. And then there is obviously Lebanon, and there is Jordan, for example, so countries that might need to be propped up. So there are ways to kind of gradually start the process. Early or late, the big conflicts would also kind of start to slow down, or at least eventually come to an end. So then we can move in this direction of kind of doing something more positive in Syria.
So you want to
or
set
Iraq.
up a new kind of, it's like a new big fund, which is, you're going to call it the new Marshall Plan?
Well, that's more a symbolic name, which kind of wants to send a positive message, not necessarily to replicate the original Marshall Plan, which is a very different thing, obviously.
So you want the EU to take the lead, and you want the
And the
World
US.
Bank and the US, even though the US has made it clear they're not into large sums of money for nation building and reconstruction. Deal with that problem later. World Bank, others. Tarek, what do you think? Do you think this is going to wash, this kind of an approach? Is the region ready for this kind of a fund?
No.
You should fight for it.
I'll tell you why. I mean, again, I hope I'm wrong. And actually, we discussed.
You can convince him he's wrong, yes.
I really hope I'm wrong. But very briefly, assuming there is money, but that's a big assumption. Assuming there is money, and some of that money people keep saying is in the Gulf, for example, potentially. But I'm not particularly sure that the pockets of money, whether in the Gulf or in Europe or in the US or together, have the same strategic objectives in the region. So pulling them together is one, a challenge. Two, I think specifically if you start talking about Marshall Plan, unless I'm mistaken, but when the Marshall Plan was implemented in Europe, you were talking about countries that had certain infrastructure, human talent, competitiveness, ability to export. That is, we are way behind that. So also the fruits of that would be big question mark. Three, to a very large extent, you have nice leaders in different parts of the Arab world, but to be very blunt, you do not have necessarily a Konrad Adenauer type of leader that you saw in Germany is able to pull together and lead in that sense. And finally, to a very large extent also, you do have many, I think, problems on the ground in different parts of where these money is supposed to go to that would make many of the funders in Europe or even in the Gulf and certainly in the US have a lot of question marks regarding their commitment to putting money into a fund like that, especially at a time when the economic situation in these countries themselves, the funders, is certainly by far worse than it was 60 or 70 years ago. The one thing that I put as positive, in my view at least, is not necessarily a Marshall Fund in that mindset, but to look again at the demographics of this part of the world and how young the people are and how immense opportunities are there, and invite a number of the private sector players in many countries in the West and say, look, even if you invest in countries that are stable, Jordan, for example, or others, you will have a ripple effect on the ground that I think will lay a bit of green shoots that in the future could do or have a positive yield. To my mind, that's the most realistic approach at this stage.
But even so, Nasser Judy will know that the international community came together in a new pact with Jordan and Syria to find a new economic model, to put money into the region so that refugees were not fleeing. Were there the seeds in that somehow that can be translated into this broader, call it the Marshall Plan, call it the new kind of plan for the Middle East?
No, you're absolutely right. But when the world came together to produce the Jordan Compact, I mean, the idea was addressing the root causes of many things, but specifically in one area. I mean, I think when we're talking about a Marshall Plan for the region, it's an overarching thing. And the question that I would ask is, if we do it at the wrong time, what are we funding? It's all about the right time, and it's all about the environment being conducive, and it's all about stability in certain countries as a prerequisite to having this Marshall Plan, so that we can reap the most benefits out of it. So.
But the one ingredient that made that work was that Europe realized, and in particular Britain, that if it didn't help the region, the refugees would be coming to Britain. So Britain saw it was in its interest, and maybe that is what has to be necessary, that the rest of the world has to understand. They have to help the region, otherwise the region will be coming to them with all of its problems.
Well, that's exactly the point. That's putting it crudely, but
Yes.
I mean, just
a
quick thought on this is that it's no longer an individual country responsibility, but a shared global responsibility. So.
And the cost of a refugee
Yes,
in
but Turkey
Syria
knows,
is 10 times less than the cost in Germany or in another European
yes.
Union countries.
Yes. I think we should
And
commit.
so far, Turkey spent $26 billion for the refugees in Turkey. Can you imagine what we can build with that much money?
And we've spent a
in
similar amount, and
Syria?
look at the size of our economy compared to Turkey.
Right.
Yes.
And
But I think-
Lebanon and Jordan and the others as well.
I think we should commend the efforts of GLOBSEC's Young Leaders Forum for putting their minds to, because I think, what is needed is...
Keep the plan alive.
Yeah, no, yes. Do you want to just a brief comment from you or one of your colleagues? We've got some very good suggestions, a bit brutal, but some suggestions for, to go back to the drawing board and rethink about there needs to be a solution in some way. Do you want to just very briefly?
Well, I mean, we definitely would not like to sound as naive because we were given this task of discussing a Marshall Plan, and then we collectively, almost unanimously, decided that it would not be the right recipe for the Middle East at the time being, and we discussed with Mr. Tariq Osman, and we've decided that it wasn't really the right choice. We later decided that it would require a determined political solutions with baby steps maybe, and some sort of infrastructure investments rather than an overarching Marshall Plan.
Excellent.
And what country are you from?
From Turkey.
But he has American accent.
Oh, that's okay. We all have accents. And you're from which country?
I'm Bulgarian.
You're Bulgarian. Well, you'll both be probably ministers by the time the Middle East is ready for some kind of... Someone's after your job, Your Excellency.
Just one small point. We're
Yeah.
thinking of this as a long-term process. So essentially, even if you start with small steps, it's going somewhere. So you have to start somewhere.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
I want to come back. I'm sorry we don't have a lot of time left. I'm just wondering whether now it's like an auction. Everyone is putting up their hand because they know that it's about to be sold. This gentleman here had his hand up first. Repeatedly. I'm just going to take one comment from the floor. This is the tallest, the man who must be on the GLOBSEC basketball team right here.
Thank you. I have one
Very
comment
brief.
and one question. The comment is that we agree that we all failed in public opinion, European and the Middle East all. So respected leaders need to confirm for me that we all failed in public opinion.
What do you mean failed in public opinion?
Now I'm making it. Public opinion means that we failed, in fact, to come for a solution. Killing the foot soldier is not a solution. As you all said, in fact, that would definitely, they will hunt us back. So it is not the responsibility of the Middle East, and it's the entire world problem. So the problem in the West also, a lot of recruitment has been done, in fact, from the West. So the only thing that we failed, the leaders failed, in fact, to come with a narrative, to understand that this narrative is getting fed, in fact, by a lot of leaders, by a lot of countries that even, we name it, Saudi Arabia and some other countries, they were, in fact, financing, sponsoring, or if not directly, some elements were sponsoring. Why are we still afraid of this to mention and target and expose those countries that they are the main problem they are financing? So the issue that you're putting it, it's like Middle Eastern
Your point
problem.
is made. Which country are you from?
I'm coming from Afghanistan.
Oh,
So
okay.
thank you for that. So the
Okay.
problem, we figured it out that is not easy to solve it in Afghanistan. The problem is now in the State, in Europe, and all the other countries. Recruitment's number, you see that, and from Europe going on.
Okay,
so,
fine, okay.
So how do you find the solution? Why don't you expose that one, that is a worldwide problem? That is not the Muslim problem.
there are
That is
many-
we are failing to find the right narrative, to who are financing and giving the narrative to these guys.
Okay,
because you will never
thank you
stop
very
it.
much. Thank you very much. In other words, you cannot
Well,
find a solution.
I don't agree with you that the countries that you mentioned are sponsoring those terrorist organizations. First of all, those terrorist organizations, be it Daesh or al-Nusra, whatever it is, PKK, YPG, FETO, they are posing, first and foremost, a direct threat to those countries, Saudi Arabia. Why Saudi Arabia or any other country should finance the terrorist organization posing the threat, targeting themselves? So this is the rhetoric actually circulated in Western countries. And also between, sometimes between the Muslim countries as well, to accuse each other whenever they disagree on this and that. Also between Iran and also Gulf countries. But I don't agree with you that these terrorist organizations are sponsored by Muslim states. But I agree with you that why those people are choosing Daesh to join. But not only Daesh, why other foreign terrorist fighters are coming to join different groups, including YPG or other groups, sometimes regime or Hezbollah or revolutionary guards of Iran, or why foreign terrorist fighters were going to eastern part of Ukraine to fight each side. There were 35,000 foreign terrorist fighters, and 99% of them were not Muslim. And why Korean or Japanese are coming all the way from Asia and to join Daesh or other terrorist organizations? This is another question. And of course, unless we kill the ideology of Daesh, Daesh will continue hiring radicalized people from many source countries. And according to our statistics, there are foreign terrorist fighters coming from 125 countries. We have this statistic because we stopped them at the borders, we captured them, and we deport them to the source countries. So from 125 countries, foreign terrorist fighters are coming to join.
But with all due respect, sir, you're absolutely right that there's countless numbers of foreign fighters coming from all across the world, majority Muslim, majority Christian. But you will have known directly from a country like Syria and from Afghanistan, where you had Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Iran financing, supporting different groups. And whether or not they were extremists at the start, they became more radicalized and had a huge impact on the countries in question. Do you not see that as being part of the problem?
If you mean the moderate forces of Free Syrian Army?
No. As you know,
this is
not the Free Syrian Army.
recognized as a legitimate opposition by everybody.
Jabhat al-Nusra and Tahrir al-Sham and all the different manifestations.
Jabhat al-Nusra is listed as terrorist organization.
Yes.
For instance, Turkey listed both Daesh and al-Nusra as terrorist organization, even before many countries didn't know the name of this terrorist organization in 2013. So both of them are terrorist organizations. And nobody can, no country can sponsor those terrorist organizations.
Yes.
And any country supporting, in any means, with any means, those terrorist organizations should be accountable.
Exactly.
One of the most difficult tasks that Jordan was assigned in one of the ISSG meetings was to coordinate between the different members of the ISSG as to which organization was to be labeled as a terrorist organization and which organization was not. We coordinated that and we ended up with a lot of disagreement between the countries.
Yes, it took forever. It took months and months. And
How many names mentioned? 170 different groups actually nominated by different countries.
But
in New York, I remember that.
But I think this does point out a fundamental issue. You cannot have a homegrown solution unless you have a better understanding of what the homegrown problems are. The two are inextricably linked, and I think this is part of the discussion. I'm just going to take one from here in the front to have a gender balanced. And please give your name and where you're from.
Yeah, I am Sam Kitbi from UAE.
Okay.
I think we met in Riyadh also.
Yes.
I'm just objecting when you listed also UAE as one of the countries funding the terrorist group.
I know they have
playing a
yes,
constructive role.
They have concerns about some groups funded by some of the other
but
countries.
then not the terrorist group. And we have never.
I didn't say terrorist. I said helping different groups. I didn't use the word terrorist. Please, your question.
Just my question to Your Excellency, Mr. Oglu. When was the turning point for Turkey turning to fighting ISIS? Before that, ISIS was coming from the Turkish border. When was the and ISIS? We've seen the photos all of in Istanbul. They were there. When did you feel that no, ISIS is a dangerous group and you have to fight it?
From the beginning. There was no turning point. I just said that Turkey listed Daesh or ISIS as terrorist organization. Even UAE doesn't know the name of Daesh. It was 2013. And since then, we have been fighting Daesh. Since then, we have been actually doing our best to stop the foreign terrorist fighters' flow. And there are 55,000 people within the no-entry list. We have captured and deported more than 4,000 foreign terrorist fighters in Turkey. And those terrorists who are responsible for the attacks in Paris and Brussels actually were deported by Turkey to those countries. At the beginning, they were not taking this issue very seriously into account. And when I asked them why they were coming to my border, my airport, I was deporting them, and eventually they were coming to my airport. And I was questioning my colleagues, probably Nasser was there, how come they are coming back? Freedom of movement, they were saying. Freedom of movement to the terrorists, foreign terrorist fighters. But thank God, I'm not happy with the terrorist organization, but thank God, due to the bad experience, now source countries are taking this issue very seriously. Intelligence and timely information sharing is very important.
That's right.
And Daesh, no other country has killed more than Turkey, Daesh elements more than Turkey. We have killed around 3,000 Daesh elements in Syria and more than 700 Daesh elements, Brother Mustafa was also in Iraq. It's almost 4,000 Daesh terrorists we killed. Which other country killed that many Daesh terrorists so far? So there was no turning point for us from the beginning, we listed. And when even when Daesh actually kept my consulate people of Mosul as hostage, I was participating in the international Syrian support group and also coalition meetings against Daesh, and I was sharing my concrete proposal how to defeat this terrorist organization, and Nasser is one of the witnesses.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, discipline is part of democracy as well. We have 7 minutes left. So I'm going to just get from you, our distinguished participants, a little bit of a Middle Eastern meze, a little bit of a contribution from both of you just to add to the discussion very quickly. Otherwise, you'll never talk to me again. From here and then here.
Yes, good afternoon, Konstantin Egetz from Moscow. I have one short observation and one question. The observation is Minister Çavuşoğlu was constantly referring to the Astana process, which, as many people see it, is a counterbalance to the Geneva process. I think that the old Russian wisdom says you have two processes, you have none. They kind of cancel it out. And that leads me, well, I just invented it. I'm good at inventing Russian folk jokes. You know. With a German name, that usually goes well. And my question is actually, how do you see the role of Russia in the Syrian conflict? Because it doesn't, from the domestic point of view, doesn't look as if Vladimir Putin really wants to settle it because it works for him very well. And the big white elephant in the room is the role of America.
Okay,
How do
that's
you
your
see?
point. That's your dish in the meze. Yeah.
Jonathan Isle, I think my question is directed at John Jenkins, who's suspiciously quiet. What role do you see for the Europeans, apart from the discussion that we had about the European Union and financial questions? What role do you see perhaps for individual key European countries or for the European Union as a whole in this situation at the moment?
Okay. Yeah. And then you, and then, yes, please.
Hello, Ayman Mhanna from Lebanon. It's clear that we're living in a period of making stability great again. But if I want to look at homegrown solutions, homegrown means people's positions and ideas being represented in shaping the future of their country, i.e. democracy. At the same time, if the major players are the world's top jailers of journalists, countries where freedom of expression, freedom of the press, human rights records, gag orders are very common. I mean, human rights violations are very common. With the situation in Egypt, we know what it is. The situation in the Gulf countries, we all know what it is. If these are the guarantors of a political solution that is democratic and truly representatives of people's will, I mean, there are plenty of question marks related to the viability, especially that we're not looking at the day after, but the 25 years after. Yes, thank you.
Exactly, part of the debate. Okay, and this will be the last one, the man with the red tie. And your name?
John Hudson with BuzzFeed News in Washington. For Foreign Minister Cavusoglu, the New York Times this morning put into plain view the brutal tactics that President Erdogan's guards used against protesters.
Okay, this is not part of the...
In D.C. Yeah. State Department also condemned those tactics. Is there still any remorse on the part of the Turkish government?
Okay,
and
we want to stick
I'd be
to the
remiss,
topic. Yeah.
I would just be remiss if I didn't bring up that President Trump, just earlier today, hailed the electoral victory of a Montana congressman who body slammed a journalist.
Okay.
So any comments on that as well?
No,
Thank you very much.
the second one I think is beyond the scope of this.
Civil society.
Well, no, I agree. I agree. It's a very, very important point. A very, very important point in terms of democracy and human rights. John Jenkins, role of Europe.
You know, this is generational. And I think one of the problems for politicians, especially in the conditions of the modern world, is they want something to happen today or tomorrow. It's this inability to sustain attention over a long period. And what we're looking at in the Middle East is a very long period of reconstruction, I hope, or if it's not reconstruction, continuing disaster. I don't think it is the Marshall Plan idea is in itself a ludicrous idea. Because fundamentally, what we've seen in this region is the collapse of governance in certain states. And this is not governance, this is not states or borders that emerged from Sykes-Picot, because if you look at Sykes-Picot, it was never implemented. What happened in the 1920s was different. You're looking at the collapse of certain states which emerged in the aftermath of the Second World War, a certain model of governance, which was represented by Nasser's Egypt, by Hassan Zaim, Syria, by the Iraq of Abdul Karim Qasim, the Arab brothers, and Saddam Hussein. That has gone. So what you're looking at in the longer term, and you can't kill ideologies. What you can do is deprive them of oxygen, of the grounds where they breed. And to do that, you need to reconstruct, or in some cases, I think in Libya actually, construct a proper state. If you look at what everybody voted for in those elections from 2011 onwards, in Egypt, in Libya and elsewhere, they voted for better governance. They voted for something that was going to give them a better tomorrow than their yesterday. They didn't vote actually for the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They voted because they thought they were going to get a government which provided something better than they had, which proved to be false. But that's what they were looking at. So when you think of what the Europeans should do, and I mean, the Europeans have been talking about a role in the Middle East forever and a day, ever since I joined the diplomatic service in 1980, the time of the Venice Declaration. And this has been something that is, and yet there hasn't really been one. And Mark Otter will perhaps bear testament to this, the search for a European role in the Middle East. I think you have to be limited in what you try and do. Personally, if I was advising Mogherini on what to do, I'd say refugees and Libya. I think Libya actually is something which is doable.
Tarek Usman, if there is to be a long-term homegrown solution, it must also include respect for human rights?
Yes, of course, but I think the real issues at this stage will not, there is solutions if you'd like. If there are solutions in the medium term, I think more in the long term, will not come from the states. I think the most interesting things that are happening in the Middle East right now are actually not even the wars, right? The role of religion in the Middle East is, Islam and Christianity, by the way, is evolving in extremely interesting ways. And I think some of that will feed more violence, sadly, in the Eastern Mediterranean and in North Africa in the next 10 or 20 years. But I think we will see some sort of a final coming together between a 150 years problem that has existed in the Middle East since the mid-19th century about the role of religion. We see more of interesting solutions coming from young people.
And young people may demand freedom of the press, freedom of association.
It's even coming to theological innovation. There are so many things happening in that sphere. I think the nature of the state itself, there's somebody from Lebanon. Lebanon has been an extremely interesting example of forging a new form of a state. And in my opinion, the fact that they did not have a president for 2.5 years, now they have one, that they're now debating a new election law. What I'm trying to say is that you'll find, I think, new interesting, not new borders, but new forms of governance that are appearing in the Middle East, very new, not coming from the state, coming from young people. Most of the socioeconomic problems that people were talking about, a Marshall Plan, in my view, will not come from the West or from the nation states of the region, will come from entrepreneurs, social and business in the region.
Very good, yeah.
In order to talk forever, the solutions, in my opinion, are not in the short run, most likely not in the medium run, and to my mind, almost certainly not coming top-down, but bottom-up.
Yep. We're seeing that in Mosul already. The private sector is already mobilizing. Nasser,
just a quick thought.
Yeah, the Russia.
You
Russia.
mentioned.
King Abdullah visits there more than Washington now.
Very much so, but I think you mentioned reconstruction. I just want to say very, very quickly, in most cases, we're not just talking about physical reconstruction. We're talking about reconstruction and in some cases, construction, not reconstruction. There are countries that have not seen political institutions, the likes of which we are all used to.
Exactly.
So you're talking about construction, not just physical construction. Russia's role is key, in my opinion. We've maintained that all along. My good friend mentioned that if you have two processes, then you have none. I have to say, I mean, I don't have all the information readily available these days, but I have to say that Geneva was about the larger picture. It still is about the larger picture. It's still alive. It hasn't kicked off yet. But Astana is a different thing. It's about operational measures that can be taken while we anticipate the larger picture to be resolved. So I think when we're talking about de-escalation, when we're talking about some of the practical steps that we saw in Syria on the ground, Astana certainly came in to help. But the larger picture, of course, the political transition, the political solution, is the Geneva process. So let's hope that you have two processes that complement each other rather than cancel each other out here.
New Russian wisdom. Your Excellency, there's a number of questions directed to you about human rights and something which happened far away in Washington and even Montana.
Well,
I will leave it to your discretion.
we made the official statement about our position, so this is not the platform to discuss bilateral issues here, so I just skip this question. And with regards to the construction or reconstruction, to construct or reconstruct the country, we need to reach a solution, and we need to bring stability and security. Unless we ensure that we cannot rebuild or reconstruct the country. Until we reach that, at least we can start with the safe zones, which this idea gets more support now. We have been defending this idea from the beginning, but including our ally, United States, more and Germany, and more countries are supporting this idea, but we need to implement it. And with regards to Astana process, Astana is not an alternative to Geneva, but Astana helped to resume Geneva talks. And both Astana and Geneva talks are moderated by United Nations. We made sure that by United Nations, and Demistra is moderating. And Astana is a kind of confidence-building measure platform for confidence-building measures. And also, those agreements, the last agreements we signed, if they are implemented, will be very helpful, actually, to start meaningful talks, negotiations in Syria. With regards to Russia, for sure, Russia wants to maintain its presence in Syria. And I see that, including United States, nobody is against this. And to maintain its presence, Russia wants to reach a political solution as well. I have no doubt that regime is for military solution, and its supporters as well. But I know that Russia is for political solution, because the military solution has been a tremendous cost for Russia so far. Thank you.
And Your Excellency, just I'm on your point is noted. The BuzzFeed question. We hope you can get an answer somehow when you're here. Just leave us.
You can read my statement of my ministry on that issue.
Just leave us with one last thought. You began by saying you don't agree with the American decision to work with the Syrian Kurdish forces. Just to leave all of us, do you think this can be resolved such that the battles in Syria can go forward? Just a short.
The Mosul example, Mosul should be taken an example in Raqqa as well. And now Raqqa is surrounded, and there are also Arab elements within SDF, and more than 60%. So the YPG can stay around, and Arab elements should go into the city. And after the operation, the administration of Mosul should be left to the local people.
Ladies and gentlemen, a homegrown solution to a homegrown problem. Our session is short and the road is long, but I would like to ask all of you to join me in thanking Tarek Usman, Nasser Jude, Mevlut Cavusoglu, and also John Jenkins for your illuminating comments, and also to GLOBSEC Young Leaders Forum for your intervention.
Thank you.
Food for thought is great. food is even better. The buses will be leaving at 6:30 from outside the hotel. You should have got your invitation in your envelope to the dinner session. Then it's back to the hotel at 9 o'clock for cocktail, conversation, whatever. It can go long into the night. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, to discuss the future of NATO. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.